The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Step outside of your comfort zone. See the world with a whole new perspective. Join us and experience the unexplained on the Paranormal View.
And welcome everybody right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight, those here in the chat room and those listening from around the world. We appreciate each and every one. Tonight we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
And we have Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And we got a great guest lined up for tonight. And if you do have questions, you can private chat them to either myself, H. Foister, or Ceiling Cat, and we will get those answered right away. So with that, because we've got a lot to actually talk about tonight, I want Jeff to go ahead and introduce our guest.
Well, tonight's guest is Peter Robbins, an investigative writer, author, and lecturer whose writings and research are focused on the subject of truly anomalous UFOs and their implications on humanity. Having spoken at conferences all over the world, Peter is also host of the live weekly 2-hour radio talk show, Meanwhile, Here on Earth, at KGRA Digital Broadcasting. So welcome, Peter Robbins.
Thank you. It's good to be with you guys tonight.
Greatly appreciated. We got a great friend that he's on here quite often. He is the MUFON State Director of Ohio, Thomas Wertman. And he's the one that recommended you for us to get you to come on the show. He said you're real good.
Well, I'm honored. I think Thomas is a great guy, and he's a terrific state director, that's for sure. I've had the pleasure of actually speaking for Ohio MUFON out there in Ohio rather than virtually, as I'm doing now.
Yeah, I've got to meet him a couple times, and we're real good friends. So when he recommends somebody, I know that they're good. So I got your paper that you had sent, and there is a lot to actually talk about. I think I watched a video that you had, and you said you was telling about your sighting. You had a sighting of a UFO when you was young. Why don't we just go ahead and let you tell us how you got involved in this?
Yeah, I grew up in a much simpler time as we did. Had what I would call a happy childhood, a lot of interests, but in no way did it include the subject of UFOs, save science fiction movies, especially the good old black and white B ones that would often play at our local theater on the weekend. And one afternoon, actually late morning, I was just 14 and my sister Helen was 12. We were goofing around as kids do on the front lawn in the little village that we grew up in. And one of those times for anybody who lives in a small town or a village that there's nothing going on and there's nobody out there. I mean, nobody. And I caught something out of my right peripheral vision and said either Helen or look. And we watched as 5 silvery white disc-shaped objects came in over the neighbor's house in a very precise V as in Victor formation and simply stopped. They were oval in shape, elliptical and metallic. They were close enough that we could make out regular detailing around the edge of each. And they just hung there in the air for an interminable amount of time. And my sister and I had very different reactions. It so challenged everything I knew as a kid and believed and thought that I was not able to really deal with it. And that memory got repressed over the next days and weeks. And it really didn't emerge for over 14 years. My sister, on the other hand, found it the most wondrous thing that she had ever seen. And it was also the beginning of a direct being taken experience for her. Interesting you asked me this question, because although I've talked about it, this event in my life numerous times over the years, in interviews like this and documentaries, in conference talks, etc., I've written about it. A very good friend and close colleague, Richard Dolan, very well known in the field, had been wanting to do a in-depth interview with me about this, and we did at the end of January. And for any of your listeners who would like to really explore what happened to my sister and learn more about what happened to me, and I'll go on a bit, but the interview is edited down from 2 hours to about 70 minutes, and it's heavily illustrated. I would encourage you, whenever you have the time and the inclination, to go to the Richard Dolan Show on YouTube, and you will see basically a GIF, a sign that says 1961 UFO abduction, and a close-up of a drawing that my sister made for Bud Hopkins, who was the leading expert and really the pioneer in the scientific exploration of UFO abductions. And it's really that easy. Just go to YouTube, The Richard Dolan Show, and you'll find it right there. Anyway, to compress the story a bit, I was overwhelmed. My sister was incredibly moved by it. She never forgot it. But that afternoon, she came up to me and asked me if I wanted to talk about it, and I made it clear that I did not. And as she told me many years later, when we first discussed it, when my memory came roaring back, why didn't we talk about this? And she said, do you remember that afternoon I asked you? And you said no, and I respected that. And, one day leads to the next, and here we are all these years later. But that was how I came into this subject. And we're talking now about, at this point in my life, where the memory returns, it's already the mid-1970s. And I would say overnight, but in the course of several minutes of her recounting her event, after confirming my memory for me without my feeding her information. Basically, I set the scene, and she told me what I remembered with a few tiny parameters that we worked out shortly after. And I was one of those people who was lucky enough as a young person to be good enough at something and enjoy doing it, that I really knew from the time I was young what I wanted to be, which was an artist. And I was beginning to really live that dream in New York City when all of this came down on me. I continued to teach painting at my alma mater, the School of Visual Arts. I continued to do my work and show my work. But quite honestly, the heart had gone out of it because something that I knew was more important had gotten in the way. And with a certain amount of resentment, I became truly obsessed by the subject and simply started to buy books and look to educate myself. It may sound almost unbelievable right now. We're talking now, of course, some decades before the internet, but I didn't know there was such a thing as ufology. I didn't know there were people that did this work. And so I carefully got myself involved with one person, then another, and found several terrific mentors who helped me to get on course and start the work that I've done over the last 4+ decades as an investigative writer.
Now that's interesting. Did you ever express any of that repressed memory in your artwork? Looking back on it now?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I am old enough. I came of age in the 60s and was very much a member of the counterculture. And at that point in the 60s, when they were the 60s, I tried LSD for the first time. And it was not something somebody made in their basement. It was manufactured by the Sandoz Pharmaceutical Company in Switzerland that developed it in the 1940s. And everything was done just right with a number of caring friends. And during that experience, in a distorted way, some of that memory did break through. And being an art student, I had all my art supplies laid out and was doing all kinds of drawings and watercolors and that kind of thing, and did a number of watercolors, kind of in a child's storybook way about this event. And then they went into a portfolio and I forgot about them. And some years later, I came upon them and my reaction was I was absolutely horrified. And what I told myself was, this is terrible art. This is so poorly done. If I get hit by a truck tomorrow, I do not want people to see this. And I destroyed it. And then the memory simply receded for X number of years, until 1975, when, for a number of reasons that I now understand quite well, it came roaring back in great detail.
Wow. So the drawings were basically done from your point of view as a child then?
Well, yes and no. They were done in a childlike way, but very much while I was under the influence of psychedelics. So they were informed by that as well. And once, again, that memory had returned, my artwork was transformed overnight. My obsession transferred itself from my active mind and how could I have forgotten that? And, what does it represent? And are these real? And what's it all about? To obsessively drawing and painting them for a period of time before I started to go back into non-UFO related artwork. But I remember just kind of poignantly laughing at that amazing scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind when the film came out, some years after I became involved in the field, that unforgettable scene of Richard Dreyfuss at the dinner table with his wife and kids near tears as he's, building the Devil's Tower out of mashed potatoes and saying, this must mean something. I couldn't stop. I was truly obsessed.
It does bring out that, and that era is fascinating because it was the days of LSD, mescaline as part of therapy, and isolation tanks, which were highly used in, I think it's Harvard. And there was a lot of repressed memories coming out from people. And it's interesting that I find it far more genuine than some of the experiences being told today when we have so much social media going on there.
Good point. Social media is such a wild card, and I do joke with people sometimes that if I do have other repressed memories, I don't remember them.
That's me. I don't feel that I've ever been abducted. I don't feel anything that has happened to me. So, not that I want something to happen, but I guess when people have stuff like that and it starts coming out, you start wondering, what else am I actually trying to suppress or not thinking about?
Well, that's a great observation, and you can bet. Once my sister told me about her experience, and you have to understand that this was years before the term gray was part of the language. She described the beings that took her, basically, and that she remembered on board this craft, not using that terminology. And although I was completely unaware of this phenomena, and there was the Betty and Barney Hill case, which happened in the early 60s but became public knowledge in 65. There was a book out on them, but it was, even in the world of UFO studies, it was in a fairly unexplored area of inquiry. And at the same time, my sister Helen, who passed almost 20 years ago now, we were extremely close siblings, great friends, both artists, both working together and having often, the same friends and the like. But we watched out for each other's backs, and my intuition was she certainly wouldn't lie to me about this, and it was accompanying what I thought was the wildest thing I had ever encountered in my life, just citing these things. At the same time, I did wonder if this could happen to her. Could it happen to me? And I don't remember it. Among my other things that I'm proud of in my work over the decades in this field was, for probably about half of the time of the 35-year-long friendship with Bud Hopkins, I worked as his assistant. And Bud, over that time, over his professional lifetime, explored the experiences of over 800 individuals. And I was by his side working at least several hundred of those cases over the years. Nothing at all came up for me. I, at my own request, underwent hypnotic regression with him, with another one of my early mentors, Pete Mazzola, who was a tough, no-nonsense New York City police detective and a crack UFO investigator who, in the later 1970s, the New York City Police Department sponsored his training in hypnotic regression for criminal investigation, but he also applied it to working with UFO witnesses, contactees, and abductees. I underwent hypnotic regression with both of them and another hypnotist, 3 separate occasions, to explore if there was anything else that would rattle loose for me. And the way I see it now, no. We also know there's a pattern where if 2 people are together and only one of them is a person of interest to these other intelligences, that group of them that we're talking about here that do this, the other one, it could be a husband, wife, sibling, boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you, is rendered unconscious, or just, put down, knocked out, put to sleep, whatever, while the other one is taken. And that seems to have been the case with Helen and I at that time. So for me, that was a huge amount to live with. Now, I've interfaced with so many hundreds of people over the years to whom that experience would be a cupcake. It's nothing compared to what they've been through. And yet at the same time, again, for me, it was the biggest deal I've ever had happen to me in my life. So I was so undone by this memory returning that I ultimately felt I really needed help. And I found a psychotherapist. And I was very fortunate because Dr. Baker was not only a brilliant clinician, but he had really lived through history. He was a the first assistant to a brilliant physician named Dr. Wilhelm Reich. For the last 11 years of Reich's life, Reich became very interested in UFO studies toward the end of his life, and Baker had two distinct sightings on his own, one on his own, the other with Dr. Reich. And I knew that he wouldn't make fun of me or think I was crazy or anything, but he helped to normalize my attitude about this phenomena and to understand that my sister and I were perfectly sane as far as this goes, but the world's attitude toward the subject was highly neurotic, to put it mildly.
Well, you also are bringing up an interesting part of the abduction experience, and that is the remorse or the guilt feelings of those around people who are abducted. And I find that also just as fascinating. It's a UFO experience in itself.
That's very well observed. Especially over the years that I worked with Bud, I was pledged to confidence, and their confidence is that I will go to my grave with. And some of the most poignant memories I have of the people that I've worked with him, and ones that I've met and consulted with in the years after, is that aspect of their memory, their experience, their reflections on their experience of, I wanted to, help my child, but I couldn't. I was frozen in position. Or I was screaming for my dad, and he didn't move. And that fractured the family dynamic. That hurt our relationship. And, parents can be filled with remorse. Children's filled with resentment. Over the years, again, with Bud, we work with several people who I will categorize as the children of famous people. They're names that you would probably know in the world of entertainment, whether it's performance or behind the scenes or what have you. And it's nobody's business who they are. But their relationships with their parents, based on these experiences that we're talking about, degenerated tremendously as a result of the parent not being able to deal with or acknowledge their being so freaked out and having to acknowledge that this had happened, and their complete inability to protect their child. It's a rough dynamic. It's not the rule, but where we see it, it can be particularly poignant and life-changing.
I could see that being, well, especially back in the day when psychiatry really wasn't that prevalent. Certainly what happened to Betty and Barney Hill, I don't know how much therapy they received afterwards, and what that did to their relationship. It seemed to me in their instance, because they were both abductees, it made the relationship.
Barbara, you dropped off.
To them. But,
well, I'll jump in.
I thought that was me dropping off when suddenly.
No,
he's back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but your question fell off, Barbara.
It did.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
About Betty and Barney Hill, that them both being abductees had actually made a relationship stronger to a lot of degree.
That is correct, Barbara. I knew Betty a little, but her niece, Betty and Barney's niece, Kathleen Marden, who, maybe not surprisingly, has gone on to become one of the world's ranking authorities on the subject of abduction, and who has written a number of books with co-authors on the related subjects. They did not have therapy per se. However, they did go through hypnotic regression and relived their memories under the very careful and watchful professional eye of Dr. Simon, I'm forgetting his first name, but he is a very distinguished psychiatrist who developed regression as a way of assisting traumatized World War II combat veterans. And everything was recorded, and these recordings are available. The emotional impact on Barney and ultimately physical impact, he died much too young, was tremendous. If you listen to these tapes, there's no artifice here. It is two people reliving an experience that they had completely separately and completely isolated from each other in reliving them. Also, the hypnotic suggestion was that when they came out of the hypnotic session, they did not have a conscious memory of what they had said and recorded. That was not revealed to them till sometime after the fact. Of course, everything meshed up perfectly, but I don't think either one of them had therapy per se. But you're right. They had a strong marriage. It continued to be a strong marriage. They were there for each other as much as they could be. But again, the impact on poor Barney was tremendous. And this at a time when, John Q. Public probably felt, they're doing this for attention, or, they're mentally ill, or who knows what. That ridicule factor has been a great asset to those that want to keep this subject under wraps, although that ridicule factor is really loosened up considerably over the past few years.
Well, yeah, and we consider now that there's a man for some of the military, the Pentagon, to start releasing more of the UFO information, that people are a little bit more open to discussing any sort of paranormal or UFO activity or abductions that they might have experienced.
That's my observation. 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, most adults who did have an interest in the subject would either keep it to themselves or within a small group of people that they knew and trusted. But it's fair to say that, and I can say this in informal demographic, having interfaced with so many of them over the years on a fairly regular basis, every year now, more and more people care less and less what other people think about what they think about this subject. And that's a very healthy trend, and it just continues to expand.
And I think that because so much of this and the new things that are going on with us going into space and everything, and now that the government has even released some footage of UFOs that the Navy had even had on their radar, how much more do you think is going to be coming out?
I think it's inevitable that more and more will come out at this point. The fact is, as just mentioned, this past August, something truly historic happened. There have been various pronouncements over the decades, but this one really hit a new level of the Pentagon saying, we are now officially interested. We've all known they've been interested no matter what they've said otherwise since the get-go in 1947. But now they are online, so to say. And that means other establishment figures in the world of science and psychology and physics, etc., are safer to come forward and say, I have an interest in this as well, and know that they're not going to be automatically regarded as kooks. I think for decades we were seeing a very, very successful effort to wire up simply an interest in truly anomalous UFOs, with somebody being delusional, a faker, a con person, a mystic, somebody wants to be famous, somebody wants to make money, when it's also counterintuitive. But it worked. And it started in 1947. It's something I researched extensively, which was an absolutely nonstop barrage of media coverage all through the summer of 1947, when this phenomena kicked in modern times, putting it down in every way possible, suggesting in every single possible manner that no matter what was reported, it could be explained in conventional terms, and that anybody who felt otherwise was, living in a fantasy world. And Americans bought it, and by extension, the Western world bought it, and so on. What seems to have happened several years ago is that the rug got pulled out in a way from under the secret keepers. It had been unraveling for years, what we call disclosure. It's a generic word, but when used in context, it's about UFO disclosure and, in a public manner. It's certainly not here now, but every day it's added to a bit more. I think part of that is the very easy access to all sorts of information on the internet now, but that's very double-edged. There's so much overt crap out there and so many outrageous claims by straight-faced, seemingly, sober and sane people who, in some cases, are looking for attention or to feel special or to feel like an insider or, develop this cloak and dagger kind of personality. But you've got to be, as in all things, be careful of weeding through the information and use your good common sense in coming to conclusions. Visually, there's so much alleged UFO footage out there. What we just referred to before about the Navy footage, that's from 2004, but it only came to the surface in 2017, late 2017. And that footage, which has been rescreened, I'm sure, tens of thousands, if not millions of times now, kind of triggered a renewed interest. But let's face it, for the last 20 plus years, we have lived in an era where anything, and I mean anything, can be elegantly faked in still and moving images. And most of what's put forward, for public view has not been fully vetted by professional photo analysts, that kind of thing. So my basic feeling is that the forces that be realize this is a secret that not only can no longer be kept, but it isn't being kept. It's just, it's not like the anti-war movement at the height of Vietnam, when thousands of young people and then hundreds of thousands of young people and then several million people, including all their parents or a lot of their parents, and finally Walter Cronkite said this is wrong, it needs to stop. The UFO anti-secrecy movement, clunky phrase, is growing every day, but not geometrically. It's growing arithmetically, 2, 7, 18, 3 people at a time, which is good. But there is still a ways to go to get to this critical mass. And I think the forces that be are now just doing their best to more or less manage the flow of information, slow down acknowledgments that they're going to make anyway, and give themselves enough time to think through what is going to be transpiring when it hits the fan, when the world basically learns this is real. The establishment has been lying about it for 75 years and, further back if you want to get historic about it. And we are not alone. And these other intelligences don't just represent off-planet presences. They may be interdimensional, whatever. I think we're dealing with a myriad, as well as we can know, because the aurora is still officially under wraps, that we do have hyper advanced aircraft that is basically triangular in form. It reminds me that in the 1950s, probably 55, 56 or so, the Navy made an announcement that it had its own flying saucer. And they had contracted with a Canadian corporation named Avro to produce, I think, 2 very clunky, round devices, maybe 15 feet across or something, that it looked like a donut, and inside of it was a very powerful fan. Only one of them ever flew, and it was a bit wobbly, and it was, it ran on gasoline. But they got a lot of mileage out of that with the public at large and the media that, oh, well, we have these round flying machines, so that must be what these people are seeing. And that slowed down, I'm sure, a certain amount of interest among some segment of the public at that point in history.
Peter, I wanted to let you know for about 2 or 3 minutes, you wasn't being heard, neither was anybody. I lost internet connection, and hopefully it's back on track. I didn't have to restart it, I don't guess. Barbara, are you with us?
I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. It always happens during these UFO shows, too.
Well, he was talking, all of a sudden it went blank, and I was asking Barbara, you there, Jeff? And
no, I didn't hear you at all. We could hear him.
Well, it popped up then. All of a sudden, it told me, said, you've lost internet connection. I says, oh, crap. Now I'm going to have to redo everything. But it come back on by itself, so I have no idea.
Well, that's a double shame, because that's when I was talking about all of the super secret stuff that the NSA...
Yeah, exactly.
I dare not do it again.
The nuclear codes and everything. That's right.
Maybe they cut it off.
Back in Area 51. Come on, Henry.
That's it. Sorry, you had your shot.
Wow. All right, I'm sorry about it. It wasn't anything I could do, but it just happened. So
remember to start recording again.
Well, it'll hopefully loom large in the legend of this broadcast.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that it's still recording, because I didn't lose that, I don't think. I didn't lose power, I just lost internet connection. So it should,
I'm used to that.
Yeah, it's still recording, so we're okay with that.
So you can pick it up in the podcast, folks.
Yes. Anyway, I know we've got about 20 minutes here before break. There's been a lot of the big sightings, you might say, like Roswell and Kecksburg and different things like that. Have you been able to do anything with Roswell or with Kecksburg?
My friend Stan Gordon, who's a highly respected researcher in Pennsylvania, he is as far as I'm concerned, the leading authority on Kecksburg. I have been in the area. I've never visited the exact site, but I've never investigated it on my own. Roswell, on the other hand, while I've not been actively involved in the field, several of my closest colleagues and friends in the field, Don Schmidt and Tom Carey, are, for me, the leading voices in Roswell research. And I was lucky enough I guess it was about 2007, to be invited to speak out in Roswell for the first time. And I landed the job of a lifetime. For the next few years, I was directly employed out of the mayor's office, although at a distance, because I live in New York, the mayor of Roswell, to oversee their yearly huge UFO conference. But more interesting to me was to be the city's liaison with Governor Richardson on any matters related to UFOs. I've been out to Roswell, I think, about half a dozen times now. I have spoken to original witnesses, military personnel who were involved peripherally in one way or another, or old-time residents whose parents were involved. Almost all of them have passed now. I take it extremely seriously. And for anybody with a advanced curiosity, especially if you're in the Southwest, I highly encourage you to visit Roswell. You can, although things obviously right now have not returned to normal because of the pandemic, but I'm sure they will resume, hopefully this summer, when we're hoping that maybe we will be able to get back to having the conference. It's still up in the air right now, but you can go out, the property where the crash occurred is private property, but there are, approved tour people who can take you out there. Also, right in town there on Main Street is the International UFO Museum and Research Center. It's a modest regional museum in that it's an old, probably Egyptian style, originally movie theater that has just been kind of gutted and dedicated with wonderful exhibits to Roswell and the greater subject of UFO studies. But their archive, their research area, and their library are mind-blowing for anybody serious about the work. It is the largest publicly accessible library of UFO-related books and information in the United States, bar none. There are several very impressive private libraries, but I mean, it's all Dewey Decimal System and set up and ready to go. And for legitimate researchers, the amount of materials in their archives donated by, in many cases, first and second generation lifelong UFO researchers, investigators, authors, people who were involved with the events in question, is second to none. But I take Roswell extremely seriously.
Now, we know that the government has opened up more and more. Do you think that they will come out and say, yes, we did get stuff from Roswell?
No, I don't, unless the hand is forced in one way or another. And I'll tell you why. One of the most nuts and bolts reasons is the responsibility, no matter who or what groups or what agencies and offices within the greater American government were involved in a decision like this, it would be the president who would be the one on the spot making the announcement. And Harry Truman was president, of course, when it all went down. Truman probably knew as much or more than any other president that followed, and that makes sense. Eisenhower, I think, would be the second most knowledgeable. But the people that control this information are not elected. They're appointed, or in some cases, I think they inherit their positions. And they are a very closed group. Also, every president, I would expect, to one degree or another, either in the most minimal way or in depth, as in their early briefings, probably learned something about the reality of the situation. And my educated guess is that they have been encouraged to do nothing about it and hope to God it doesn't blow up in their administration. But let's look at it this way. We have had liberals, conservatives, Democrats, Republicans, 12 presidents or so? I forget what number Truman was, since Harry Truman. And ex-presidents are a very close club, all things considered. And for the last president, this president, the next president to come forward and say, the equivalent of my fellow Americans, it's my solemn duty to tell you that Your government has not been telling you the truth since 1947. We are not alone in the universe. There was a crash of a machine from undetermined origin, under intelligent control in the plains of San Augustine outside of Roswell, New Mexico in the summer of 47. And we know a fair amount about this subject, and I'm now open for questions. That would mean that just by a simple statement like that, a existing president would be acknowledging that every single president, since and including Harry Truman, was an unindicted co-conspirator in the greatest cover-up in world history. And I think they're probably a little sensitive about putting themselves on that spot or being put on that spot. Now, again, perhaps this or a future president's hand may be forced. I happen to think that disclosure, it's an organic process. It's happening now, sometimes slower, sometimes in a more accelerated way. I think if it had not been for the pandemic, last year would have been an absolutely breakthrough year. But we were busy and preoccupied with other things, as is understandable. It might come in the form of, say, a WikiLeaks dump of legitimate, authentic information. It might come in the form of fully authenticated photographs from the surface of the moon or Mars, establishing a very real presence, ancient or contemporary, that is not us. It might come in the form of, a Daniel Ellsberg type Pentagon Papers release, or they, in quotes, may at a certain point say, we've given you several millennia to get used to this, and we've accelerated over the past 75 years, and you guys are dragging your feet, so we are going to find a way to let you know in no uncertain terms in the next few years, and get ready. It's all theoretical. It's all, what you're willing to believe, what you want to believe, what you can tolerate believing. I have no idea how it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to be officially. If it is official, I'll bet the chances are better that it will happen as a result of information releases by the Russian government or the Chinese government, but not the American government. We are the original secret keepers. We are the ones who basically got the ball rolling in terms of national security statism and in setting up a national security world, which is what we live in.
Well, this is an international issue. And as I recall, a few years ago, didn't even the Pope acknowledge that there is extraterrestrial life?
In so many words, going back over 20 years, the Vatican University has had the equivalent of a chair in extraterrestrial studies. For many years, a cardinal appointed by the Pope, the Italian Cardinal Balducci, was their spokesperson on matters extraterrestrial. And it got to the point where that cardinal made public statements regarding this subject on Italian television. He spoke at a number of UFO conferences. He passed some years ago. But I remember following the story very carefully because of all the world's great organized religions, the Roman Catholic Church is probably the most organized and the most controlling of information. And they are most certainly the ones who are leading the way, not in a grand public way that everybody hears about every day. But there was a time when it was, no, this is minions of the devil and satanic, misunderstandings, and there's nothing in the Bible that says there's beings on other planets, so it doesn't exist. No, the church takes this seriously. And ultimately, probably with good cause, because there may well come a time when it breaks through. And Roman Catholics will have a leadership that is been planning and makes no bones about the fact that the likelihood of us being alone in the universe is literally impossible, and that, everything reported as UFOs legitimately in the truly anomalous sense may in fact be true. But I wish more of the world's religions would be as involved in studying this question as the Catholic Church is.
Wow. We're
totally
getting awful. Go ahead, Barbara.
No, I was just saying I totally agree. I think the cosmology of Hinduism pretty much says that there's probably extraterrestrials, but
yes,
and it's interesting that the Catholic Church is taking such a stance that it is now.
it is.
Out of all the times that they could have done it too.
Well, it occurred to me, and I'm keeping an eye on the time here. We're at 8:52 my time. It occurred to me that probably when this abduction phenomena really kicked in earnest, and I think it's, although it may have been going on irregularly since time immemorial, it's a relatively modern phenomenon, and it is a worldwide phenomenon. We know that. I'm in touch with researchers all over the world on this subject. That if, let's say, you are, living your life in Central America or some quiet corner of the world and you happen to be Catholic and you have this kind of experience, and of course, you don't know what's happened. It may freak you out. It may challenge your thinking on many things. For a lot of people, the one person that they feel they may be able to confide in without being judged crazy or ostracized by their family or society may be their local or their parish priest. And I don't think that's an outrageous thought at all. In fact, it occurs to me that there may well be a tradition going back decades of, the same way that a psychotherapist may have their own therapist and share information about a patient that they're working with, that a parish priest may go to a local bishop, and that bishop passes this information further up the line. And who knows, one of the reasons the Vatican may have become seriously interested in this subject over the years is more and more reports of this kind being confided to prelates around the world and putting the pieces together in their own way and realizing that there does seem to be something going on here that's not demonic and not mystical, but, scientific and keeps going. The reports are literally all the same in terms of the dynamics reported, and we should know about this because these are our parishioners, and, we don't want to be unprepared if this thing breaks through. That's purely my thought.
Hey, I got a question from the chat room. You might be able to answer before break time. Patsy wanted to know, do you recall any other abductions other than the one in 61? And was any information received during your abduction as to why he and his sister were abducted?
Okay, number one, I was not abducted. My sister was. We had a UFO sighting together, and out of that, attached to that event, she was taken. So I would be speaking for her. She's no longer with us, but she did explore in hypnotic regression and with discussion, I think, 2 other childhood similar experiences, but not in a lot of depth as I recall. Again, with Bud Hopkins, who is the best known and most respected specialty researcher in that area of study. I'm not sure if I fully answered the person's question.
No, it seems just fine.
Okay.
All right. Barbara, you got anything?
Well, I was just going to mention the fact that it seems to me that There's a television show called The X-Files, and they almost got it right with the idea that there is a group of non-elected individuals that may have been in contact with extraterrestrials and made some sort of deal.
Anything's possible. I don't think they have to make deals, personally. I also think we're dealing with a myriad of them. Also, Chris Carter, who created the X-Files, it was a marvelous show. It ran for 10 years. The first 7 years especially were brilliant. Their writers did their homework, and a lot of the knowledge was very well researched. A lot of it was just wonderful, invented fiction. But I think the most important thing that came down from the show is the words on that iconic poster, "I want to believe." And that governs a huge amount of ufology and the way that most people approach the paranormal. They want to believe, they don't want to believe, they're afraid to believe, they long to believe in this, but maybe not that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we'll just go ahead and stop right there because another question, questions that I have won't be answered in a couple of minutes. So I think we'll go ahead and take us a quick break, and we'll come back in about 5-6 minutes. So Jeff, you want to take us out?
Yes, you're listening to the Paranormal View on para-x.com with your hosts Henry Foister, Ceiling Cat Barbara Duncan, and myself, Jeffrey Gould, with tonight's guest, Peter Robbins. So stay tuned for more of the Paranormal View after the break.
Whether you're listening at home, at work, or anywhere, thanks for making Para-X part of your day. Your source for everything paranormal, Para-X.
And welcome back, everybody, right here to the Paranormal View on the Para-X Radio Network. I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Those in the chat room and those listening from around the world, we appreciate each and every one of you. Tonight, we have with us Barbara Duncan.
Good evening, everyone.
And Jeffrey Gould.
Hello, hello.
And speaking of listeners from around the world, Barbara, where do we have listeners at?
United States, Canada, England, Spain, Belgium, Norway. And Unknown is back in the chat.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I hope you're enjoying the show, except for when we got kicked off for a little bit. But everything's working now, seems to be. And we want to welcome back our great guest, Peter Robbins.
So glad to be back.
All right. I know we was talking about some things before we went to break. I had another question from the chat room, and they wanted to know. It wasn't a question; it was a statement. She said she thinks the aliens will make themselves known before world governments are ready to reveal.
That is a great question, and I have no idea what the answer is.
All right, we know that a lot of sightings have taken place, like the big famous ones, Kecksburg and Roswell. But there has been tons of sightings. Now, a lot of people come out and say, "I've seen a spaceship or this or that," but they don't have, you might say, proof. Now, I know that there was 2 incidents. I think one was somewhere in Africa where school kids, alien ship come down where school kids were.
Yes.
Other than the story, did they have any other evidence? Did anybody get photos or just what people says?
Zimbabwe Africa incident, and it's a very famous one, very highly regarded. Many of the school children there observed the landing, the disembarkation, a number of faculty people. the thing that makes the case so fascinating and important is that the firsthand accounts of witness after witness after witness were so detailed, and all of the details interlocked with the details of other students. Perhaps as important, if not more so, most of these students who are now adults have been re-interviewed, and absolutely none of them have backed down. They're all in different parts of Africa or the world living their lives. I can tell you that a colleague of mine, Randall Nickerson, has been working on a documentary about this, has returned a number of times, has interviewed a lot of the principals. The late Dr. John Mack, a professor emeritus of psychiatry and a leading abduction researcher as well, who tragically was killed by a drunken driver in 2004, spent time there, also felt that not only were these accounts authentic, but that all of the witnesses were very mentally sound. But Randall has been working on a extended feature-length documentary, which I am hopeful will be released later this year and answer a number of questions about this extremely important case. But no, we don't have a carburetor from a UFO. I don't recall that it was photographed. All the witness drawings, interestingly, match up as well, though, all done independently. And sometimes witness testimony can be very weak and not what we're looking for. Other times, also as in Roswell, witness testimony can be incredibly important and very compelling. I mentioned before two of the leading and most highly regarded Roswell experts, authorities. Tom Carey and Don Schmidt have written a number of books, including Witness to Roswell and Children of Roswell, which are nothing but extended interviews with direct witnesses. Again, sadly, most of them now passed or in their 80s or 90s, 90s, and the children of people who were witnesses or were directly involved in the events in question, who learned things from their parents, etc. That kind of witness testimony I hold in very high regard.
Exactly how much evidence is there that is tangible? Like, for example, I think that there was, obviously Betty Hill's dress, the possible item from the Roswell crash. I don't know how much credence you give to abductees' implants, but how much exactly tangible evidence are we talking about in a lot of these UFO cases? Does it make a difference?
It does make a difference. I have been privy to handled implants. I have seen the analysis, scientific analysis of implants, also of tests and physiological changes that have occurred in organic material that has come in contact with UFO activity. Also, X-rays, CAT scans of implants in people's bodies in places where they couldn't possibly have found their way on their own, and never with any kind of visible scar of how it occurred. Also, anomalous pieces of metal that have come up over the decades purporting to be, part of a craft from parts unknown. Some of those are specious. Some of the results of that are inconclusive, and some of them are incredibly fascinating, and we just can't determine. It's not like there's some completely new element that is there that we don't have on Earth. There are cases where materials were so highly refined at a time before we were able to do that here in the area of metallurgy that are also, and again, that would be based on when they were found, that also add to the picture. But there's, we don't have the public, doesn't have some, crashed artifact that we can go to and see in a museum. Well, hopefully in the future. But those may very well exist, in highly secured facilities.
The implants as well. I mean, how many of those are out there? And has anyone ever been able to determine what the actual use of them are? Not just a tracking device, obviously.
Well, not the late Dr. Roger Lear. Roger was a podiatric surgeon who became very interested in implants. He passed, I guess, about 10 years ago. But he made it his business based on whether or not an abductee was willing to submit to have it removed, to remove them. And I had hands-on experience with some of them, and Roger did some fascinating analysis. The first question from a purely scientific biological realm is, if you get a splinter, your body sends out a signal, and white blood cells head for that area. You can see the redness. You can see an infection growing if it's not taken out or properly or cleaned or what have you. So how is it that these things can be put in a human body and the body doesn't recognize that they're there? I remember one study that Roger did based on some of these things, and they're usually round and about the size of BBs or resembling a grain of rice, with one exception that comes to mind, nothing approaching moving parts, that it was coated with like a stealth kind of coating that the body simply didn't recognize. And again, he removed them, but there were no scars where it had, been placed in the body. We have quite a number of cases of them being inserted up into the nasal cavity, and occasionally sneezed out or picked up in an X-ray or, again, a CAT scan. We can only theorize why they're there. And there's only a few possibilities, and you just mentioned one, Barbara. One is for tracking. One is for affecting human behavior. One might be for collecting information. Again, it's all theoretical, all possible. I should say here as well that over the past 25, possibly even longer years, we human beings, we have been doing this work as well. The first implants, and I remember the story, it was in I think a farm journal, going back into maybe the late 90s. It was a device that was on, new breakthrough piece of technology for farmers. It was a device about the size of a quarter that if you anesthetized a cow's ear and made a slit and inserted it, and, a veterinarian properly doing it, that it was like a LoJack. If that cow wandered into the wrong field and you lost your cow, within a certain distance, you could electronically find the cow and retrieve it. But now these implants are smaller and smaller, and they are, you don't see it out in major media, but they beg a question, and a very serious one, about privacy issues and civil rights issues. I remember reading a piece some years ago that one high-tech company was offering this device to law enforcement, that if you were a convicted felon, even if it was against your will, to have one of these things put in your body so that if you escaped, you could be tracked down. You think about a future dystopian world where this kind of technology is available to keep track of everybody, and it's a bit spooky.
Wow. It is. Uh, my wife was just reading a book about this guy, excuse me, this guy named Terry Lovelace, who him and a friend was abducted. They were in the military.
Yes.
And his friend, I guess the military tried to tell him you didn't see anything and tried to erase her memory. But anyway, he ended up eventually finding that he had an implant in his leg. So they have evidence. If they take an implant out of somebody, is there any way that they can track to see who put it in, or what kind of information it's feeding back, or where it's feeding it to?
Not so far that I'm aware. I am aware of Terry Lovelace's case. I take it seriously. Again, especially in the years that I worked with Bud Hopkins, I was privy to first, in some cases, seeing the X-ray or the CAT scan provided by the individual that Bud was working with at the time, and in some cases, the most noteworthy figure doing the work was Dr. Lear, as previously mentioned, it being removed and going through a scientific analysis, but nothing that revealed what it did or how it did it, or what its intentions or purposes were. Again, we can only make educated, deductive guesses at that as far as I'm concerned.
Somebody in chat was bringing up Travis Walton, who's I find to be one of the most credible abductees, and his story is just remarkable in that. I don't believe he would ever mentioned anything about an implant there, but it's obviously he went through an intense trauma.
Yes. Travis, who was taken in November 1975 in one of the most famous cases in the world, in great part because it was made into a Hollywood movie about, 25 years ago or so, Fire in the Sky.
Terrible movie.
Yeah, well, some of it was accurate, some of it was not accurate.
Well, they got names right. That's about it.
No, they got more than that right, but they also took a number of liberties. I met Travis.
That is very diplomatic.
Well, I'm telling you that I know that a fair amount of it was correct, but some of it I know was not correct because I first met Travis in the early 90s. I read his book when it came out in 79. Had a lot of respect for him. Became acquaintances, then friendly acquaintances, then friends, and then good friends. He is a good friend. I have visited him in Arizona. He has visited my house here in upstate New York. I helped him create his conferences in Arizona. We've lectured together all around the country. And I am also very proud of the fact that I was an associate producer of a feature-length documentary, in part created to correct the nonsensical parts of the film. It's available for streaming or as a DVD. It's called Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton, and I highly recommend it to you.
It's very good.
Yeah, it's one of the best UFO documentaries out there because it really does the science. And the people who contribute to it are everybody from FBI profilers to psychologists to media people to human behaviorists, naturalists, and I think it's one of the most gilt-edged, strongest cases that we have. And Travis, over the decades, has become an extremely articulate spokesperson for the reality and the seriousness of this phenomena. I have also visited the exact site where it happened, deep in the Sitgraves National Forest, which the part of it that he and his logging crew were working in is in Arizona, but it's massive. It must be 500,000 acres covering parts of 3 states. And it really is a wilderness area. And I went back there with Travis and a number of people, and he was kind enough to basically relive the events of that unforgettable night with us, something I'll never forget.
Wow. Now,
Yeah,
I can't imagine having to relive that experience, but
well, he's been very generous about that, and I've heard him speak quite a number of times and even introduced him at quite a number of conferences. And I've heard him begin his talks occasionally, especially for a wider audience, essentially with words to the effect of, if it was you up here telling me in the audience what had happened to you, I might think you were crazy too. But what I'm going to tell you is what happened to the best of my memory. And then he shows, in video footage, material backing him up of all sorts. I've also actually spent time with a number of the men he was with that evening and interviewed them.
Now, there's another case that I hadn't even heard anything about, and I assume that you also got to work on it or investigate some. It was in 1989, and it was the Voronezh incident.
Yes.
I'd never heard of it, and that's in Russia. So, how are they letting stuff out, or did they have any control of it?
Well, that's a very unique case, and it's one that I not only investigated personally, but became personally involved with a Russian scientist who lived and worked in the city of Voronezh. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. Voronezh. I forget. ZH. Yeah. But he was on the ground with his team doing the investigation. The thing about it is that it occurred in September of '89, and the case broke worldwide several weeks later in October. This is right at the moment when the Soviet Union is literally disintegrating. And we were put in contact with each other and started to correspond. And I think if it had happened a year earlier, our mail would have been gone through like crazy. But as it turned out, the Soviets, who were doing their best to prop up their disintegrating empire, were not prioritizing mail between the United States and the old Soviet Union at that point. So we were able to not just exchange information, but to develop quite a cordial professional and then personal friendship that we wrote back and forth to each other for some years. And I've actually written about it and given papers on the event. It happened on an afternoon at a time when school children were getting out of school. And a UFO, a fully articulated UFO, came down in a city park. And as I recall, one very tall being, a smaller being, a robot, disembarked and started to move around the park. A boy screamed. They aimed the device at him, and he disappeared. He reappeared later on. But even the great French ufologist Jacques Vallée, one of the most respected in the world, he became very interested in the case and went to the city to meet with my friend Yuri Lozotsov, the head scientist involved in that particular investigation, and also felt it was authentic. One of the things that interested me most was I was living in Midtown Manhattan at the time, and I happened to be actually working on a UFO book at that moment, but I had the TV on CNN in the background, and I listened as the first reports of this started to come through. And TASS, the Soviet news agency, had their offices in Rockefeller Center, maybe half a mile from where I lived. And I took a chance and I just called them. And I introduced myself as an investigative writer specializing in the subject of UFOs and following the story. Meanwhile, their newsroom was going crazy because they were breaking the story in America. And I just said it. Could I come by and talk to some of your reporters? And they said, absolutely. And 40 minutes later, I was in their offices in New York and ended up leaving with a number of telexes and original communications. But the American press did what they usually do and were condescending and sarcastic and trying to explain it away. The Soviet press took it very seriously, and it was released with the approval of the Communist Party through Izvestia, the official Communist Party newspaper, and TASS, the official news agency. And that would have never happened previously. So they took it very seriously. And not surprisingly, the analysis that Lozotsev and his team did show very definite physiological changes in the soil and in the tree that was a central artifact in the landing site compared to the soil around it. One of the things that the Americans got on the case of was, well, there are so many witnesses who are children, and who can trust children? They have such imaginations and things. It's all rather insulting, as it often was back in the day. But that's a very important case that even a lot of American UFO researchers are not really aware of.
Yeah, is there other countries also that has reported, I guess, either abductions or contact with a UFO and aliens?
I think the question is there a country that hasn't?
Oh.
Yes, it's absolutely an international phenomenon, no question about it. Not that long ago, 5 years ago, maybe 4 years, I spoke at a conference in southern Brazil and spent some time down there. And the subject is so prevalent in their culture that, the government doesn't repress information about it. They take it seriously as the public does. That's not uncommon in Central American countries. We just don't learn about it because there's basically a news blackout, or by the time it gets here, we demean their cultures, or, say they're simple mystical people, and what do they know? Well, they know what they've seen. In 2013 or 15, Steve Bassett, who is a marvelous presence in UFO research and really the key person in the disclosure movement as far as I'm concerned. I'm going to be interviewing him, I think, in May on my radio show. Steve was able to create an event at the National Press Club whereby he had actually invited seated American senators to professionally sit in at a congressional hearing at the press club lasting 5 days with witnesses from, I think, it was a dozen countries at least. Government people, pilots, key investigators. I was honored to be one of those who gave testimony. But one of the most memorable presentations was by two pilots, and I'm damned if I remember whether it was Peruvian or the Colombian Air Force, but, they were highly respected jet fighter pilots. And they talked about, and this was all simultaneous translation. It was a very amazing event to be part of. They talked about the fact that they had been scrambled to chase UFOs on more than one occasion, and talk about the openness of their society, that their senior officer had assigned them more than once on days that they had free to appear at local high schools and talk to the students about the reality of UFOs, and not just in the abstract, but from their point of view as military pilots who had been scrambled and chased these damn things. So, yes, it happens all over the world. Same for abductions, same for sightings, same for contact experiences. No question about it.
Now,
Can you imagine how society would be different if we were allowed to do that? If pilots, for example, were allowed to go into schools in the United States and say, if you see something, this is how you record it, how you do it accurately, how you videotape it accurately or photograph it that way, how much different it would be.
That would be a breath of fresh air, Barbara, and I think we're still some distance from that in this country.
I'm sure you've seen the meme where the two people are standing there saying, "Look, a UFO! Grab the worst camera we have."
Well, now that's changed, of course, because almost everybody has a smartphone with a brilliant high-resolution camera attached.
Oh yeah.
At the same time, we're also living in an age of photoshopping mania, where any image can be presented as authentic. If you're online, for example, and you're looking at UFO-related information, and you see what appears to be a great still or brief film footage of a UFO, the things to look for are not the image itself as much as is an actual name attached to it, a real person that can be verified as alive. Do we know where and when it was actually shot? Do we know if there were witnesses? Has it ever been subjected to objective professional photo analysis? Without that stuff, a picture means nothing. Film footage means nothing. As far as I'm concerned, it can look great, but please, a lot of elementary school kids can put it together at this point with their technical knowledge.
oh yeah,
That's true.
I have problems just turning my phone on. Is there one place that seems to be more active with UFO sightings and abductions than another, or does it seem to move around to different areas?
You mean, do abductions happen in one particular area or another?
And sightings, yeah.
Oh, once again, this is an absolutely worldwide phenomenon. There certainly are areas with higher incidences of confirmed UFO sightings, UFO-related contact events, and we can, make certain deductions about that, but there's no area of the world that I'm aware of where this doesn't take place. In the old days, in the Cold War, there was some theoretics that both the Soviets and the Americans played on.
Did I lose somebody again?
No, I wasn't sure if it was me
Oh,
falling off.
Bud, are you still there? Peter Rose?
Peter.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can now.
Did I drop out again?
Yeah, you just went blank there for a minute.
If you remember where I was, I'll try to repeat the answer.
Jeff,
There's only a few words we would have lost.
what'd you say, Jeff?
In any,
Good grief.
Try again, Jeff. What'd you say?
I was saying just that he only lost a few words. He didn't lose too much.
Okay.
in any case, there are no, during the Cold War, if there was a truly legitimate UFO sighting based on what we now know of a review of declassified documents, either naturally declassified or through a Freedom of Information Act action where we can confirm a very real, genuine, anomalous UFO event, it was not uncommon for the forces that be to put forward in the press, especially if it had been witnessed by many people, that it might have been some secret Soviet, rocket test or something. And the same thing for the Soviets, if there was a legit, we now know, because after the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of previously declassified documents simply made their way out there, some of them for sale, that they were doing the same thing. For many years, from really the beginning of the Chinese communist takeover in 1949 until the last 10 years, when there's been some penetration and contact between Chinese UFO researchers and investigators, and it is a very popular subject there and taken quite seriously. We had no idea what was going on within mainland China. We now know that they were experiencing pretty much the same ratio of sightings and events as we were. Unlike America, however, where you have, say, MUFON, the largest UFO research organization in the world, but it's still pretty small. It's only X number of thousands of members, but it's still the largest in the world.
Oops.
Yeah. Bud, you went silent again. I'm sorry, Peter.
Is that Bud?
Okay.
Trust me.
Yeah, I don't know
You
what.
back?
Go ahead.
In China, in order to be a member of one of these groups, you need credentials. You need to have a degree in engineering or physics or astronomy to be part of these working groups. Where here, anybody interested in the subject can, join MUFON, or there are other UFO groups out there. But they take it very seriously. Bottom line is, again, this is an international phenomena. There are no borders that it doesn't cross.
Wow.
And so do you think that, is it possible that there was some sort of contact with, say, Eisenhower, for example, alien contact? And was there an agreement made among countries, or was it just an agreement made between the United States and any sort of extraterrestrial?
That's a great question, Barbara. For years, I would actually get angry when people would seriously talk about the Eisenhower Treaty with the aliens of 1954 and the underground fight under Dulce, New Mexico, between the American troops and the aliens, and the treaty that was drawn up, as my late friend Bud Hopkins used to say, with an expletive I can't use on the air. They don't have to make a treaty with anybody. And I think it's nonsense to think that they do. However, the greater question of, certainly Eisenhower had an interest in the subject. He was beloved and respected by the intelligence community and the military. He was our commanding general in Europe, for gosh sakes. And although a Republican president, he was not what we would call a conservative today. If you look at the party platform of his election in 1952, it's very progressive. Be that as it may, that is an important question. And again, for many years, I didn't look at it very seriously. I now am open to the possibility that shortly after Roswell, well, I take that back. Roswell happened in 1947. At some point during his presidency, he may have visited Roswell without any publicity to look into this for himself, or to be presented with information or artifacts that were available to somebody of his rank there. In December, a very interesting film came out, not some big budget film, a very quiet film called The 11th Green, 11th Green, the 11th green referring to golf. But it deals with, in a highly creative way, based on an informed imagination, I'll say, with a hypothetical of how something like that might have happened, a meeting between Eisenhower and a non-human presence. I found it thought-provoking and entertaining, and I'd recommend it to people, although I think for some people it will just be too dry and kind of heady and be taking too many, creative liberties. But I do take the possibility seriously. And again, I don't believe for a minute that a treaty was signed. Again, they can do what they want. And what was put forward originally was, we'll give you technology if you let us take people and experiment on them. They can do what they want. So I do dismiss that premise, but I'm certainly open to the possibility that there was some kind of contact there. And if it's proven true, I won't be surprised. And if it's proven untrue, if that's ever possible, I won't lose any sleep over that either. But it's a question worth asking.
So the spin might very well have been unofficially a treaty, but the truth of the matter was they didn't want to tell anybody in the world that, hey, aliens can come anytime they want to and abduct anybody they want to, and there's not a darn thing that we can do about it.
Yeah, again, I don't think the word treaty even enters into it. Let's just look at the facts of this thing, the phenomena hits in no uncertain terms in 47. And within the next 20 years or so, there are these beginning reports of abduction, so to say. And who was running the country and the world at that time? In so many words, a bunch of powerful dead white guys who were probably pretty taken with their own power at a time when America, in some respects, was what we wish it was today. With all the problems we have now, with all the ones we had then, we had made a difference in terms of defeating fascism in the world. We had taken the enlightened step that I don't think any government had ever considered before then, to the degree that we did with the Marshall Plan, where we helped our two biggest enemies rebuild their societies and create democratic constitutions. And you remind me of the last war that the Japanese or the Germans started. They have grown into, respected members of the world community. And all of a sudden, information comes to Truman and the people closest to him that it looks like, H.G. Wells was right. And all those, space fantasies, we're not alone. They're here. We can't even wrap our heads around the basics of their technology. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they want. We don't know whether they mean us well or mean us not well. And at the highest levels, I would imagine the push was just lie and say it's something else. Whatever else it is, it's not this. But in the meantime, behind the scenes, we're going to study this every possible way we can. We're going to draw up maps. We're going to have committees. We're going to keep the circle as tight as possible. And we're going to start to live in this schizophrenic world where this is the most real thing. This is the highest secret of the American government. The national security state was not built around nuclear secrets. It was built around covering up what we knew about this phenomenon. And it has all evolved from there. I think it's one of the reasons why we're such a mess on a certain level. We're all about lying and about this one secret at the center of all the other secrets. If you visualize a pearl, you know that it begins with a grain of sand that irritates the pearl, so, the clam that it lives in. And it simply starts, the oyster that it lives in, and it starts to build this calcification around it that decreases the irritation that human beings find beautiful. And the more calcification around it, the more valuable it is to people when it's extracted and, put on a necklace or a string with other pearls. But the reality is, inside each pearl is this irritant. And I think that's a good way to see how post-war history has grown over the decades.
Now, I know that there's talk of the different types of aliens.
Yeah.
I've also heard that there are aliens that kind of look like us, that they can walk around amongst the people, and they're
Yes.
really aliens. Now,
Yes.
how much do you know about that?
More than I want to know, in that when I first entered this field on my own, with no knowledge and no colleagues, all I felt I knew was that there were these beings that took my sister. And later on, I learned that they took other people, returned them. But it didn't occur to me for a while that they were one of many types of beings, races, other intelligences, whatever you want to call them, from out there, from in here, from the next dimension over, what have you. When credible people first introduced the idea to me that there were these beings that looked like us enough to walk down the street and not really notice them as terribly different than us, most of them described as Nordics, so to say, I thought that was outrageous and fiction and irresponsible and silly. And my big problem was it just made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. But after I started to study the Travis Walton case, where there were archetypical grays, but also very human presences, in the same experience, I took it a bit more seriously. And then as I started to hear more and more accounts from more and more people that Bud was working with, that I got to know, there's also this phenomena of what we call hybrids. That is part of the abduction experience, where the sperm or ovum is taken and where beings, theoretically, I think it's actual, are created that are part us and part them. Some of whom look enough not like us that they are not out and about. Others who do look enough like us that they are out and about and very likely part of our world. What they are aiming toward doing, what it's all about, why they're here, again, we can only be theoretical about. But I do take it seriously. And in my years with Bud, most of the reports that we got, because people were coming to him overwhelmingly because they had had the kind of experiences that he had published about and was more and more knowledgeable about and putting together a database, involved these archetypical grays, 4 foot, 3 foot, 3.5 foot, large cranial structures, large black sweeping eyes, a hint of a mouth, a hint of possibly a nose, no ears, very emaciated bodies, and occasionally a very tall version of that. But I'd say, 20% of the reports that Bud got over the years varied wildly, and some of them completely unique to certain cases, like in Voronezh, in Russia. Descriptions of beings that we had never seen before. Now, let's also bear in mind, and we're only scratching the surface here, and I know we're coming into the end of the show, that there is no question in my mind and the minds of a lot of my colleagues that a number of these intelligences at least can affect our thinking, that they can put a thought in our mind or they can erase a thought from our mind. If we're looking at another being that, potentially, if we were completely in our own senses, we would be freaking out about. And they implant in our mind the image of a 4-foot white owl, which is pretty strange because they don't exist, but that's easier to deal with. And there's another factor at play here too. which is the physiology of human shock. We may simply, in our mind's inability to take in, accept what is happening in front of us, we will project an image that we can tolerate. And that will become our safety zone, and we'll remember that rather than what's really there. Again, this is all open to discussion, but I do take seriously humanoid, non-human presences, so to say, as well as the ones that are more archetypically exotic.
So even if they're doing that, why do you think they're wanting to come to this planet with all the billions and billions of planets and solar systems out there? What is so fascinated of Earth?
Great question. I'll give you some thoughts. I don't know which one or one might be true. Maybe they're like us, and once they develop to a certain point, they want to get out there and colonize. Look at the history of humanity and what we'll call first world countries, that once they had established themselves and sailing ships and rudimentary weaponry and technology and ways to preserve, salt foods and things, what were we doing? We were out there getting into other parts of the world, taking over other cultures, whether it was, the Roman Empire or the Byzantines or the Sumerians. It's part of our nature, seemingly, to get out there and try to take over other parts of our environment. Perhaps they have a pre-existing relationship with this planet that goes back to the dawn of time. Perhaps, I have a lot of problems with the idea of time travel. Popular theory is they're us a million years in the future. Maybe, maybe not. But if that appeals to you, that's a possibility. Maybe they are partially responsible for us becoming who we are, in that, 100,000 years ago or 40,000 years ago, they were visiting and did a little DNA splicing here and there to move Neanderthal quickly through Cro-Magnon and into more modern humans. We do DNA splicing all the time. We're constantly futzing around with other species, or now we're on the cusp of huge revolutions in terms of designer, human beings, that kind of thing. Maybe, again, if they do have a pre-existing relationship with this planet, and although even conservative scientists and astronomers now, if begrudgingly, theorize that there may be tens of millions of Earth-sized planets about the same distance as we are from our sun, that they are from a similar sized star, which means we have the basic building blocks for primordial life to begin, in terms of, if you're a scientist and totally secular, that, that all the components for that first one-celled animal are there, and it's all uphill from there. Or if you're a person of faith, that, God's miracle of creation can occur there as well. But maybe where somebody's graduate experiment gone horribly long, to kind of compress a thought, and that we're doing a terrible job of taking care of this planet. We are the problem now. We are overbred. We are creating climate change, at least in part. We are toxifying this planet at a phenomenal rate. We're weaponizing, and maybe they're not happy with that. Maybe this wonderful little blue-green speck flying through the cosmos is a bit rarer than we imagine. Maybe it's a way station halfway between here and there that's important to them. There may be ones, and I think there are, who want us to evolve, who are right there, helping us in small ways, or want to. And there are other ones that would rather maybe that we just kill ourselves off so that things can start again and the planet can sort of clean itself out and have a chance to repopulate. Let the animals take over and, kill all of the sources that are creating carbon. Again, this is all theoretical. We're only limited by our imagination in this. Bottom line, we're not alone. There are other intelligences of different sorts coming and going from planet Earth whose intentions we can only make our guesses about, but it's all real. Make no mistake about that.
Wow. All right, our time has just slipped right on by, Peter, and I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. Very interesting. People was listening very intently.
I enjoyed speaking with you guys, and I invite any of your listeners to listen to my weekly radio show. It's called Meanwhile Here on Earth. It's on KGRA every Monday night from 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time. You can listen to it live at KGRA DB for Digital Broadcasting website, or you can go to KGRA on YouTube, type in Meanwhile Here on Earth, and either watch it live or listen to my past shows in the archive.
Yeah, I've listened to a few of them, and very interesting.
Good.
Since our time has almost run out, I want, well, you just did, I guess, give all your information out, how people can get in contact with you and listen to your show. Want you to stay on for a few minutes after we get off, and then we'll thank you for taking the time to be with us tonight. So with that, I do want to thank everybody for listening tonight. Hope you enjoyed the show. Next week, we have Kathleen Marden on, and that ought to be another very interesting show.
So, it will be, trust me.
I know.
She's the best.
So with that, I guess it's time for us to run. Barbara, Jeff?
Good night.
Good night.
All right, we'll see you next week at the same time. So good night, everybody. You've been listening to the Paranormal View on the ParaX Radio Network. Join us again next week at the same time for more of the Paranormal View.